Hey guys, this video is step one in becoming fluent with useState. So today we're going to talk about some of the common errors and go over exactly what it is. So useState, it's a React hook, basically just a function that adds state to functional components. So what is state? It's a built-in object in memory for React. It allows components to store and manage data that can change over time. So if a database is your long-term memory, then state is going to be your short-term memory. Determines how components behave and reacts and re-renders because whenever we update state, we also re-render the component so that the latest value that we have in state is reflected. And we can store any kind of data in state. So it could be booleans, objects, strings, numbers, doesn't matter. We can store it in there. And so state persists between re-renders, however, does not persist between a refresh. If you refresh the page, all of your state is going to be gone. So that general information out of the way, let's jump in and go see what this looks like. So we're going to come over here to this name. So we have to import useState in from React. And this is going to be how we use it. So here's our format. useState is called, and it takes an initial value. You see here, the initial value is the string JSON, and it returns an array. So here we have const, and we're going to destructure that array. The first thing in the array is going to be our getter. We're getting that information. So in this case, username is JSON, and here's our setter. So set username. The naming convention is you want to call this whatever makes sense, whatever this value actually is. And then here we're going to take this, capitalize the first letter, and put set in front of it because it's going to set that value. If you're not familiar with destructuring arrays, it works much like this. We have this get bikes, which returns an array with two strings. So we see down here, const array, two values in it, equals a function, just like here, const array, two values equals a function. That's get bikes also returns an array. And so whatever is at index 0 is going to be the first one. Where's at index 1? It's going to be the second one. And these are positional. And then you just give that variable a name. So we see down here I have this p, bikes, bike 1, bike 2. So bike 1 is the first one. That's Ducati. Then here I have bike 2. It's the second one in the list at index 1. And that is Triumph. It shows up down here. So that's how we destructure arrays. And that is exactly what we're doing right here. Now, as we get this value out, that's JSON. So I'm going to take username. I'm going to put it in this p tag. And right here, we have this p tag. Then I have this variable username. And that's what's showing up here. So now we can update this by calling set username and passing it a new value. So when we click this button for Jan, that right there, is going to call set username and pass it the string Jan. The same thing for Bob, the same thing for electric on these other buttons. So we can go through it, and you see as we click them, they change appropriately. So we call set username, this function, you pass it a new value. That new value becomes the value for username. Now, when that happens, it re-renders this component so that whenever I click on this one for Electra, it's going to re-render this component to show that updated value. As we look at this, we see that I'm calling this function in my onClick, but I have an anonymous function for it. So if we break this down, we see that we're passing onClick this whole function. This is an anonymous function. And inside that anonymous function, I'm making this function call. This might be easier to understand if I put that inside of square brackets. So here we have function. And inside the square brackets, we have the function body. Let's look at this one. We have the function. And then inside the square brackets, we have that code block, that function body. So here we have the function and that code block. We don't need this name because this is an anonymous function. It doesn't have a name. It's simply being called when we click. Now, why do I have to do that? Because every time that we update state, like right here, with set username to Mike, it re-renders. And if we do it this way, it's going to crash. We see it just crashed on us. Let's pull it up. We see in our terminal, error, too many re-renders. React limits the number of re-renders, prevent an infinite loop. Why did this happen? Let's go have a look. Let's comment this one out. And let's go to our forever loop section. Okay, so refresh. Let's have a look at our forever loop. And we're going to see here, look at this. We have all this stuff printing out. So let's take a look at what happens here. We have value at 0. Now this is in here twice because strict mode runs everything twice. So we're just going to start with the second one. So if we look at this, I have this adjust value 1. That comes up here, calls adjust value. We're passing in 1, so that amount comes in. So console.log value, and we have our value in state. So we call set value, and it's going to take in the previous value. So, hey, that previous value plus 1, and that updates our state. So what's happening is our forever loop component loads. Comes down through all this, says, hey, p tag, I'm going to put that p tag on there. This button, okay, put that button on there. This button has an on click with that function. Puts all that on there. Then it gets down here. This button has an on click. Call this function because, you know, that's the name of the function, but this is a function call. So this function is called. It comes up here to adjust value, passes in 1. It does our console log. We see that over here. Then it calls set value. Set value updates state. So since state is updated, the component re-renders. So again, it starts going down through here, gets to this point, calls this again, update state. State is updated, so it re-renders, and then gets up here, update state again, and it keeps going and going and going. So that's why we keep getting this console log. And so we get down here and we log 25, and then React has finally had enough and said too many re-renders. We're putting a stop to this. Now, if we take and put that inside of an anonymous function, save it, now it works because this is a function, not a function call. So it will not call this every time it gets down here. It's simply going to look at this function the same way it looks at this function. Then whenever we click it, it will then call that function. Just like when we click this, it calls that function. So now we can see add value 5. So this says set value to 5. It calls this one. We see this does not need an argument. Because it doesn't need an argument, we don't have to have these parentheses. So we can put just the name of the function in there. I just want to add 5 or set value to 5. And then when I call reset value, it also does not need an argument. And it's just going to set the value to 0. So I can call these two all that I want without having to pass it an argument. However, adjust value requires an argument called amount. So since I have to pass it this argument, I now have to take this function call and put it inside of an anonymous function to prevent that infinite loop from happening. So let's now progress from our infinite loops, now that we understand those, and let's go over here to our state component. So why do we need state at all? Why can't I just put things into variables? Here I have this component called state, and we're going to do just that. We have this let sum equals 0, and we see it right here because I have this p tag. sum 0, and there it is. And we can change this. Let's make it 10. And we can see that that is indeed 10. So that's doing exactly what we expect it to do. It is showing up on our page as the number we expect. Now I have this button on click, and I'm going to call adjust sum. I'm going to pass it 1. So adjust sum takes an amount and it adds it to sum. So if I add 1, it goes up to 1. If I add -1, then it's going to go down by 1. And every time I do this, we're going to console log in. So we can see the difference between the actual value of sum and what's being reflected on our page. So let's click. So we add, sum is 1, but here it still shows 0. And no matter how many times I adjust the value of it, it never, ever changes right here. So let's get rid of this. And let's comment in our example that is using useState. So the problem with it before is when we have it set as a variable, when we update that variable, React doesn't take that as a cue to update this component. So this component never re-renders. Now we have state, however, and we have our initial value of 0 as count. And let's change that to 10. We see it changes to 10 over here also, and go back to 0. That goes back to 0 also. So this part is functioning exactly the same. And we have an adjust count. The same thing is up there for our sum. And we're also likewise going to pass it 1 or -1. And then that is going to set our count accordingly. And because we're calling set count is the method that's given to us to update this variable in state. And whenever we update something in state, it will re-render our component. So as I click add and I click count, add and subtract, the value for count is updated by set count because set count is called inside of my adjust count. And so as that value in state is updated, it causes this component to re-render and reflect that new value. And that is why we need to use useState rather than simply setting it equal to a variable. Now, let's progress from state. And let's go talk about pending state. This is a place where people oftentimes get confused. So let's jump on over here. Here we have this game. And so in this game, we have points, all right? And we have these methods. So if we find an ancient item, then we want to have an extra 10 points. So we find an ancient item, we call set points, and it takes our points that we already have and adds 10 to it. We find a gold item, then we call set points, and it takes the points that we already have and it adds 5 to it. And so that is then past our set points and becomes the new value of points. So the same thing we find now. If we find any item at all, we'll get at least an extra point. So it calls set points, and it adds our points less 1, and that being past the set points becomes the new value for points. Okay, so here we have points, and you see it is 0. And of course, like always, we can change that right here and see it reflected. So that is doing what we expect it to do. Now let's come down here to our button, find item. So we find a bottle cap. Well, we found something, so we should get at least 1 point. So it's going to call find item right here, and we should get 1 more point. That happens just like we expect. We get 1 point. All right, now we're going to find a gold item. And so find gold item should give us an extra 5 points. It's going to take our points, which is currently 1, and add 5. So we should have 6 points. Let's find our gold nugget, because that's going to call find gold item. And we have 6 points, exactly like we expect to. Now let me refresh this so we can get rid of our state. We have a new state value now. So now we're going to find this ancient gold treasure. When we find ancient gold treasure, it's ancient, so we should get the 10. It's gold, so we should get the 5. And we found something, just something at all. So we should get the 1 as well. So we should in total get 16 points. Now here, whenever we find this ancient treasure, we're going to call this method find ancient treasure. We're going to call find gold item. That should give us 5 points. Find ancient item. That should give us 10 points. And find item. And that should give us another point. So we would think that all of this should give us 16 points. Let's find our ancient treasure, and we see we only get 1 point. Let's do it again. No matter how many times I do this, we only get 1 point. Why? Let's come over here and have a look. So this is the same thing as this. We're calling set points for a gold item, which takes in points plus 10 and sets that to the new value for points. And then we call set points, which is our find gold item, and it takes in our points plus 5 and sets that for the new value. And then here we do the same thing. So what's happening here is this is our current state. So we're saying set points, current state plus 10. That is 0 plus 10 equals 0. Okay, so that becomes the new value for state for points. But then we run this one. And we take in our current state, and our current state, our function, our component hasn't re-rendered yet, so we're still at 0. So, well, that's actually going to do this equals pending. Oh. So pending state is now 10 points. But down here, we take in set points to take in points because points is still 0. And 0 plus 5. 0 plus 5 is 5. So now that's the value for pending state. And then we call set points. And points right now 0. 0 plus 1. So 0 plus 1 is 1. And that is now the value for pending state. And then once our component re-renders, it's going to have 1 as the value for points. So as we go through and we click this, we get 1. Now, if I change the order, move this down here, now let's save it. See that as I click, it's now 10 because we're always getting the current value and then we're updating the pending state. And then we get the current value and we're updating the pending state and the current value. And again, updating the pending state. Whatever the final pending state is, will become the next state. So if I were to take this one and make this one the last thing to be run, then again, it's going to add 5. So current state is 10. And it's going to take current state, which is currently 10. 10 plus 5 would be 15. So pending state would be 15. Let's click. And now we have 15. So how do we remedy this? We do it this way. So whenever we call a set method that updates state, React will automatically pass in the previous value if we just take it in as an argument in our anonymous function. So when we call a method to update state, we're actually going to pass it an anonymous function. So that's our argument function, and that is the code that we're completing. So it's going to take in the pending state. So let's refresh this. Current state is 0. All right, so current state is 0. So it's going to take in our pending state. Our pending state is still 0 because we haven't done anything to change it. So pending state plus 10 is 0 plus 10. So that equals 10. So 10 equals our new pending state. And then we come down to here and we're passing our pending state again. And our pending state this time is 10. So that comes in. 10 plus 5 is 15. So 15 is returned to set points. 15 is our new pending state. So 15 now gets passed down here. So we take in our prev. That's now going to be 15. That's our pending state. And 15 plus 1 is 16. So our pending state of 15 plus 1 is now 16. And with 16 being the final value, that is what's going to update to the new value of points in state. So let's give it a shot. I got to save it. Save it. And we're going to get our 16 because we have 10 plus 5 plus 1. And each time we're updating our pending state, we can find a bottle cap, make it 17. Come on up. Now, should add another 16 to that, and we get 36. And it doesn't matter what order we put this in, it's still going to work because it's going to keep adding to the pending state. So anytime your new state depends on the value of your previous state, you want to use an anonymous function and pass in the pending state. Now, if we were doing something like just resetting the value with a const reset points, we're just going to say set points to 0. There's no need to pass in the pending state because we don't care what the previous state was. We're just going to reset it to 0 no matter what. But anytime we're adding, subtracting, modifying in any way the previous state, we want to make sure that we're passing in that pending value. All right, so that has been it for this. Look for another one on useState to go and explain it further. Take care, guys. I hope this made a few